See how that goes over.
Yeah. And I have it, set to right on when the master slides.
I don't know. I can't even find it in the menu room. What they're doing. It's not that the menu is so deep. It is. It can be deep. They always can. But I can. But it's they use non-conventional names for things.
Oh, so third menu for the cards.
The globe.
No, the first camera one. Third menu.
Select medium.
Yeah.
I've got that, but I've got it in. Put it on slot. It's not the right kind of card. It's on the.
That's what I want.
We have not. Yeah.
Maybe it's just a card.
So that's slot one. So the memory card inserted slot two. Who cares? Okay, exactly. So.
Looking at her, she's got that.
I'll figure it out. I'm old, but I got time. So. Like I said.
I'm just standing here for you.
It's a process.
So.
Is that a big jump?
It's a one.
Did you go to the Oval and take photos?
I was in there for 4 hours. We did the TV stuff outside.
Cool.
Because we're just scheduled for Thursday, but then something happened.
Oh yeah, Palmer, yeah. Cool, man. Yeah. Is that your first time in there?
I mean, I'm not.
For a
Oh,
ball?
we actually never did.
Oh, really?
The link that.
I mean, he read the hills.
That's very smart.
Right.
It's on the desk.
Please.
There's evidence.
There's evidence.
There's
He
evidence.
read the paper, so.
Yes.
Okay, well, you're at 8,000 for the second. Well,
You gotta be House Democrats have four.
that's the shutter speed, so let's 2.8.
So like the House Democrats have
ISO.
four of the people.
It's automatic. Let's.
They talk about it every week.
Yeah.
Try it now. Just took it out of the box. A little better. It was all hard.
Appreciate you.
Sure.
Went to Berlin.
There, even though it adjusts the shutter speed and the ISO and stuff, I mean, there are limits to how far that flexibility is.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Come on in and have a seat.
Yeah. Cool, I'm sorry. Were you at the beach? Yes. Rick, over there going.
Because that's what they are. You see, she like that. Well, that's cool.
New York Times is a seat for you up here.
JHD right here.
It's a B grade venue.
Awesome. All right, folks, that's a 2-minute warning. You get started right away. Heads up, guys.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for making the trek back to the Hill and accommodating the joint locations. There is a humanitarian crisis at the border. There are children who are being held in unspeakable conditions. These are God's children. These are children who are being held without adequate food. These are children who are being held without adequate medicine. There is no soap. There is no diapers. Above all else, there is no human decency. It's something that we need to address, and address with the fierce urgency of now. The United States of America is the wealthiest country in the history of the world and the most powerful country in the history of the world. But that doesn't matter in terms of how we should be evaluated and in terms of our greatness. What matters is how we treat the least, the lost, and the left behind. That includes God's children who are on that southwest border, who are being treated by this great nation with indecency. The president should be ashamed of himself for using children as political pawns. That has to end this week. So today, the House of Representatives will pass a humanitarian aid package in excess of $4.5 billion. We will do it with a strong Democratic vote. But we are urging our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to show some decency, show some strength. Stop acting like you're part of a cult and act like a separate and co-equal branch of government that has a responsibility to allocate funds in a humane fashion. That's what's in Article 1. And we'll talk more about what we expect to happen on the floor today. But now let me just yield to my distinguished friend and colleague, our vice chair of the caucus, Catherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Democrats have a busy week in front of us. We're voting on our second minibus appropriation bills that has several priorities for the American people, including over $137 billion for housing, transportation, and other basic infrastructure needs. Also, in total absence of leadership from the White House, we are voting on the SAFE Act, which will put election security measures in place to protect our democracy. But the vote that's on everyone's mind is the vote we're going to take today on this supplemental emergency border funding. This is a crisis manufactured by this president and his administration. From the moment he descended on that escalator, He has been vilifying our immigrant communities and doing it in the most hideous and inhumane way possible, putting children in the center of it. So I reiterate what the chairman just said, that our colleagues across the aisle, and we implore the Senate and this president to take a look at what is happening with these children, to take a look at the conditions that this administration is arguing in court is okay by them. That it's okay not to have soap, it's okay not to have toothpaste, not to have diapers. I will never forget my visit to the border a year ago and having moms clinging to me, begging, where were their children? Some of them young enough that they were still nursing. And to see these children in cages and those conditions that have been highlighted by my incredible colleague, Congresswoman Escobar, have gotten even worse. What we are hearing is such a stain on our policy and on our immigration and what this country and values stand for. So today's vote could not be more important. It couldn't be more of a chance for us to say to this administration, to our Republican colleagues, that we will all be judged by how we treat the children, and that we cannot have the democracy, the country that we want, if we don't rise to this occasion and help these children and families. And with that, I will yield back to the chairman. Thanks.
And as Catherine mentioned, we've all been so thankful for the tremendous leadership of Veronica Escobar down in El Paso. She's been a phenomenal leader in terms of articulating the conditions, standing up for those who are being subjected to inhumane treatment, and clearly laying out a vision forward. And so let me now yield to my friend Veronica Escobar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Chairman, for your tremendous leadership for this caucus. I want to lay out for you all what is happening in my community and along the U.S.-Mexico border. There is absolutely no doubt that the numbers of families and children who are arriving at our front door, those numbers have increased. That is indisputable. All of us recognize that. It's taking a toll on communities like mine. It's taking a toll on the agents and the officers who, with a good heart and a commitment to their job, are put under terrible circumstances. And it is putting small children and families and individuals who are at their most vulnerable state in their life as they cross our border seeking support and solace are greeted with nothing but misery. And I want to echo what the chairman mentioned. Despite the fact that the numbers are up, this challenge, and it is a tremendous challenge, it's a challenge of resources, it's a challenge of will, it's a challenge of policy, but it became a crisis under the iron grip of Donald Trump. And it became a crisis because the administration is intent on eroding asylum protections and incarcerating as many people, including children, incarcerating as many people as possible. That is why members of the Democratic Party greet many bills having to do with immigration or appropriations of the Department of Homeland Security with suspicion and with caution. We should be cautious and we should be careful, because we've seen this administration declare a needless emergency. We've seen this administration manipulate agencies for nefarious purposes. But I have to tell you, this particular supplemental, which is badly needed and urgently needed, has been crafted very carefully by thoughtful appropriators in the House. And those appropriators have guaranteed that this money cannot be transferred, so it cannot be used for mass deportations. It cannot be used for an ICE deportation force. They have safeguarded the funding that we are going to appropriate today so that it is used for the purposes that we intend for it to be used for. Beds, blankets, diapers, food, legal assistance. We are also funding alternatives to detention, policies we know have worked effectively in the past, but that were abandoned by this administration in favor of incarceration. We are also funding a pilot program to make sure that nonprofits and law enforcement are expediting families getting to their sponsors. We all should want that. Something that the Republicans should be thrilled about, along with us, is that it provides greater oversight and accountability over the facilities where individuals and families are being held. We all should embrace that role of Congress in oversight and accountability. It reimburses communities like mine, El Paso, Texas, that has been dealing with this tremendous challenge and the crisis created by the president with generosity, goodwill, compassion, and charity. But my community is running out of funding. Our nonprofits are stretched beyond thin. Our nonprofits are running on empty. And this bill acknowledges the responsibility that the federal government has in helping local communities like mine and nonprofits like those in my community to ensure that they can continue to do the good work in partnering with the federal government. It is my hope that we send a resounding message today in the House, and that the Senate does what it has said it wants to do, which is address the humanitarian needs of those who are most vulnerable, who are in our care today. The sooner that they take up the bill that we pass today, and the sooner that the president signs that bill, the sooner that that funding will get where it needs to go. And make no mistake, Democrats stand ready with solutions on the immigration front. Today is an appropriations bill, but we have immigration's policy solutions, ideas that come from the ground up, that we are ready to pass with the help of everyone. So thank you so much to our leadership for pulling us together and for including me this morning.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. The expansion of family separation began under former Secretary Johnson under the Obama administration. You have a lot of critics who say the underlying fundamentals that led to this crisis today were started back then. And one of the facilities that gets most frequently pointed to is the one in McAllen, Texas, that was opened up in 2014. That's the one where people frequently use the phrase cages to describe, and that's an Obama-era facility. So how do you respond to critics who say that, to some degree, either the previous president or Democrats are at least silent partners in helping contribute to your current state of affairs?
Seems to me to be an outrageous proposition that is being peddled by Donald Trump and some of his allies on the other side of the aisle. We are 2.5 years into the Trump presidency. At what point will he stop blaming everything under the sun Barack Obama? 2.5 years into the Trump presidency. As Veronica Escobar articulated, this is a crisis that was manufactured by Donald Trump to feed the xenophobic beast that he has unleashed on the American people, and we need to end it. Because there is no decency as a nation to have these children being subjected to these horrific conditions. That shouldn't be a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. That's an American issue, and this week we want to solve this American challenge.
Assuming that you are able to pass the bill out of the House today, how do you anticipate reconciling that with the Senate bill? Are there specific changes you would need to see?
Well, I'll let my other two colleagues answer that question as we move forward, but I think what is clear is that there is understandable anxiety amongst members of the House Democratic Caucus because there's understandable anxiety and distrust amongst the American people as it relates to this president on the question of immigration. So I think it's fair to say that our perspective is that there must be guardrails in any supplemental appropriations bill that is signed into law that will prevent the president from transferring funds to be used for deportation beds, the Trump deportation force, or to carry out his scare tactics and unleash mayhem across the nation. Veronica? Okay. All right.
Mr. Jeffrey, you described the urgency of this. Can you reconcile it with the Senate bill this week, or is this going to be kicked into July? Ansar was saying that they could run out of money soon.
It's our view that this should be resolved this week. That is why the House is moving with urgency on our first full day here in Washington.
You talked about the restrictions on the money. There are more in this bill than there are in the Senate bill. But what about your own colleagues, many Democrats who are saying that just by sending any money at all to these agencies that have carried out the president's immigration policies thus far, you're in a sense enabling his agenda, and that the administration is going to continue to ignore restrictions that already exist and standards that are already in place, even with the language that you're adding to this measure?
I'm going to defer to Catherine, our appropriator, and Veronica, our expert on this issue, but I will simply say that the overwhelming majority of House Democrats, including the overwhelming majority of the Progressive Caucus, will support this legislation because we understand the urgency of the moment. We will be committed to negotiating with the Senate to ensure that the appropriate guardrails do exist in the most restrictive fashion possible so we can solve the humanitarian crisis. We'll then begin to have a discussion with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to address the broken immigration system. It is broken. It must be fixed. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We should do it in a bipartisan way. We'll have that conversation sooner rather than later. This week, we have to resolve the humanitarian crisis.
You know, there's been no district that's been more impacted by the Trump administration's hardline border policies than my district, El Paso. Because of that, I've invited members of Congress to come to the district. I want them to see for themselves. And I'm a member of both the Progressive Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus, the two caucuses that have expressed the most concern, and rightfully so. We had a meeting last night of the two caucuses with the Speaker in order to answer as many questions as possible. There are legitimate concerns about trust with the administration, and there is a legitimate fear that we are funding a dysfunctional system. And I'll tell you, I'm one of the members who has, from the time that I was running for office to today, I believe we need a deep dive audit of DHS because they have failed on many fronts. We've known about Central American families arriving at our doorstep for 5 years now, and the agency has failed to be nimble enough to adjust to the changing environment. So we need to figure out why that is. We need to change that. That is going to take some time. And I acknowledge that that reform is going to take some time. The urgency of now and of today is children sleeping on concrete floors, children whose T-shirts are covered in mucus. My office, as part of our casework, there was a 22-month-old separated from his father for 2 weeks. We cannot wait. We cannot wait. We've got to keep our eye on the ball, which is reforming DHS, but we have to meet our obligation as human beings and fund the needs for the care of these children.
There are certain limitations with an appropriation bill, as my colleague so eloquently and passionately put, and we recognize that. This is not comprehensive immigration reform, but what it is an answer, and we hope a lifeline to these children and families who have no one else to count on at this point in time. And we have been able to put in some of those basic measures, saying kids deserve to have their vitals checked when they're coming in after a 1,000-mile journey. Kids deserve to have soap and a toothbrush. They deserve to have a clean diaper. People deserve to be able to be bathed and to eat food that's not frozen. They deserve to have some sort of bedding and not be in a room that is way overcrowded. And we deserve, as members of Congress, to be able to get into these facilities and bear witness to what is happening. And this is what we're going to put forth in this bill. It is really a simple choice. Where are we going to save the most lives? And I believe that this supplement is the way that we can do that we can get money to help this situation that is created by the policies of this administration as quickly as possible.
President Trump has threatened to veto your bill. He threatened that last night, even before you made these changes that we made today. I just wonder how you think you're going to get around that.
So President Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Mexico. He backed down. President Trump threatened to unleash fire and fury on North Korea and Iran. He backed down. President Trump has consistently talked a big game, but then at the 11th hour, backed down. We expect that in the context of this humanitarian crisis, which he will have to wholly own clearly before the American people, if the House and the Senate act, as both of us will this week, but he decides to veto legislation. There are infant children who are being cared for by 8- and 9-year-olds who themselves are being subjected to inhumane conditions. How indecent does someone have to be to threaten to veto legislation designed to address that immediate humanitarian crisis? Donald Trump wants to own that. He can own that. I believe the American people will rise up and reject that level of cruelty.
What do y'all make of the situation in Iran? Do you think the new sanctions are a good idea? Or complicating it further?
Well, in the Middle East, we've seen over the last 20 years that there have been 2 failed wars, and that entering into an endless conflict that is not winnable is not in anyone's interest. It certainly is not in this country's interest, where we could be forced to lose thousands, if not tens of thousands of American lives. Tens of thousands will clearly be altered in terms of permanent injuries, lost limbs. That's the experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Iran is widely recognized as a more formidable adversary. And so we're all of the view that we need to pursue every available diplomatic measure, work closely with the other members of the P5+1 and the global community to arrive at a diplomatic resolution, continue to de-escalate the situation, and hopefully the so-called war hawks within this administration won't prevail upon the president to do otherwise. Last question? Oh, last 2 questions. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there a plan to do another bill later to address some concerns from the Hispanic caucus that can't be resolved in an appropriations bill regarding the border?
Yes, I think as both Vice Chair Clark and Congresswoman Escobar indicated, there is a broken immigration system. We need to fix it. We can begin first and foremost by the Senate acting on the Dream and Promise Act that we've sent over to Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard, along with over 250 bills, the majority of which are bipartisan in nature. But we can start with the Dream and Promise Act. There are many people who believe that the Senate once acted in 2013 on a comprehensive immigration reform bill that created a robust pathway towards citizenship for undocumented individuals in this country, and required things like ensuring that folks learned English and paid a fine or back taxes as appropriate, and could continue to contribute to America in the meaningful way that they are right now. So there is some urgency in addressing the immigration issue. We're prepared to do it. We should start with the Dream and Promise Act. I don't know if Veronica. Okay.
Can I just,
Yeah.
just one more thing, really as recognition of the hard work that our appropriators are doing, the fiscal year 2020 bill will also be incorporating many of the ideas and reforms that we as a caucus have brought forward to them, to the DHS appropriators. So there will be multiple avenues where you will see that Democrats have in fact, not been sitting on our hands. We have been crafting pieces of legislation and reforms that will go through the fiscal year 2020 bill, the appropriations bill, that we hope that our counterparts will work with us on.
Thanks. Last question.
Related to Iran, one of the spending bills you guys passed last week was sunset the 2001 AUMF. I'm just curious what the appetite is for restarting or debating a new AUMF, maybe in the context of Iran or any other sort of hotspot around the world.
Speaker Pelosi, as well as Leader Schumer in the Senate, clearly articulated to President Trump at the White House last week that we believe that the current AUMF does not authorize any military action against Iran. That AUMF relates to al-Qaeda, which has nothing to do with Iran. In fact, probably has a lot to do, as we know from September 11th, painfully, with Iran's rival, Saudi Arabia, which has gotten an incredible pass from this administration despite their unspeakable brutality. So the caucus, I believe, is totally united in ensuring that if the president has any desire to move forward with any potential military conflict in the Middle East, particularly as it relates to Iran, he needs to come to Congress and we'll have a debate on the authorization for the use of military force.
You want to renew the 2001 AUMF in some time, because it was sunset under the...
That is correct.
And should it be renewed? Should it be extended?
He'll have to make that case as well as it relates to ongoing activity in Afghanistan in particular, Iraq to a lesser extent, to some extent Syria, all of which administrations have argued fall under the current AUMF. He'll have to make that case to us. Thank you.